Hi, everyone. This is Amy Chen Mills with Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. And every now and then, our production team will produce a news segment for KSQD for their flagship Talk of the Bay 5 p.m. news program. We just did that with congressional candidate Sean Dougherty running for Congress in California, District 19, against an incumbent establishment Democrat, Jimmy Panetta. Panetta's father was chief of staff for Bill Clinton and also was Secretary of Defense and director of the CIA under Obama. And so this primary challenger, Sean Dougherty, is going up against a tremendous amount of Democratic establishment power and also a tremendous amount of campaign money. We thought the issues here were worthy of sharing with the nation and the world. We always encourage more progressive candidates to run for office and to challenge incumbents, even if that just means bringing up issues that incumbents need to be incorporating into their platforms, and or if it means winning. In this case, we did invite the two opponents in this race to Sean Dougherty, but they did not respond to our requests for an interview. So here you have Sean Dougherty running for Congress in the winter of 2024 in California's Congressional District 19, that's Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay, all the way down to Paso Robles on the Central Coast. I am Amy Chen Mills, and today we have on our show Sean Dougherty, running for Congress in California District 19. Sean is running against Democratic incumbent Jimmy Panetta, first elected in 2016, an establishment Democrat whose father, Leon Panetta, served in the Clinton White House as chief of staff and as director of the Central Intelligence Agency under Obama, then as Secretary of Defense. Congressman Jimmy Panetta has not faced a serious primary challenge for years, although in 2020, Adam Bolaños-Scow ran as a Democrat and won 24,000 votes in rounded numbers, or 13% of the total vote. The GOP candidate won 20%, which I suppose is to be expected when we have 20% Republicans, 20 to 30 in this area. And Panetta won 67% with 122,000 votes out of a total of 183,000. This is in 2020. Heading into this primary election, Panetta faces challenges from Dougherty, running as a Green Party candidate, and the GOP candidate Jason Anderson, a software systems professional. As an important note, we have invited both Anderson and Panetta onto this show, and other Talk of the Bay hosts have been reaching out to Panetta's campaign as well, with no response. Welcome to our studio, Sean Dougherty.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So yesterday, February 28th, you held a press conference to talk about Israel, Gaza, and historic drops of AIPAC, that is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, funding to Jimmy Panetta in the last few months. Let's listen to this clip from your speech outside of Panetta's Santa Cruz office on the county courthouse steps.
I think what matters is, why hasn't he been doing what the people of his district have been demanding of him? And I think the answer is money. I think it's that simple. Now, up until just about a week ago, our campaign was focused on the money that Jimmy Panetta has been taking from weapons manufacturers. And looking at the filings on the Federal Election Commission's website, we were able to identify at least $200,000 that he's taken from weapons manufacturers. And I must emphasize, this is just a minimum. Oftentimes, these contributions are obscured. On December 31st, 2023, just a couple months ago, in the middle of the bombardment of Gaza, Jimmy Panetta received a donation of $143,000 from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, PAC. Now, everybody understands that's a big amount of money, but let me help you understand just how big that is, how significant this donation was. This was the biggest donation that Jimmy Panetta has ever received in his entire career, his entire congressional career, as far as we can identify looking on the FEC website. So big, in fact, it's almost twice the size of the second biggest donation he's ever received. It was also the biggest donation the AIPAC has ever given, as far as we could find on the FEC website. And again, twice as big as the second biggest donation they had ever given. Twice as big as what they had given the entire Republican National Committee. And guess what Jimmy Panetta's third biggest ever campaign donation was? AIPAC PAC 2 weeks ago. I'm not kidding, 2 weeks ago. AIPAC is demanding this war continue indefinitely. Jimmy Panetta will never call for a ceasefire. He is beholden to special interests.
That was Sean Dougherty speaking on the county courthouse steps in Santa Cruz, California. Sean is running for Congressional District 19, and he's running against someone who is perceived to be very entrenched. You talked about this money from AIPAC. I was reading in the Lever an article by Amos Barshad, who's a senior reporter for the Lever, that AIPAC since October 7th has received record levels of donations. And so far they have accumulated $90 million to both promote candidates that they support, to attack candidates that they don't support, and to continue the war. They are essentially anti-ceasefire, as we probably all know. Interestingly, 13 Jewish Congress members, Jamie Raskin and Dan Goldman included, are calling for a temporary ceasefire now in a letter to Joe Biden. Hostage release, humanitarian aid and relief, and an end to the violence is what they say. So I don't know what that means in terms of temporary. But do you want to speak to why you think, I mean, that's huge to have more money than AIPAC has given to the entire RNC to one congressperson running in our district. How are you making sense of this?
Well, first, let's be clear. We're talking about AIPAC PAC.
AIPAC PAC, that's right.
I just want to be accurate. And it is, when we talk about these amounts, we're talking about single donations. So it's a little confusing. I just want to make sure if people want to fact check this and they go on fec.gov, they aren't surprised by anything. So What I'm saying is the single biggest donation they gave in a filing on a single day, that's what they gave, the $143,000, and then they gave the RNC something like $78,000. I can't remember the exact number. Why are they doing that? Oh my goodness, Amy, I wish I knew the answer. I wish there was some way that we as constituents could call for an investigation. I mean, I would like to know what was said behind the scenes, because I imagine this didn't just get dropped into his campaign bank account with any kind of conversation preceding it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the obvious reasons is because you are calling for a ceasefire. You have, because of your stance on Israel and Gaza, you have support from the Muslim community, the Arab community in this district, from what I understand. And Panetta is not calling for a ceasefire, although more and more congressional members are.
So I think, again, all I can do is guess, but I agree with you that part of it, I'm sure, is that he's facing a primary opponent who's calling for a ceasefire. And I'm doing so in an overtly pro-Palestine way. So I think that's part of it. I think that probably another factor is that there's a very large Muslim and Arab community in this area, in the Bay Area, and they have a lot of money. So, and in fact, there's a new effort. I don't know much about it, but there's an effort to create, I think it's called AMPAC, American Muslim Public Affairs Committee.
Okay.
So I think that AIPAC, I assume it has less to do with me than it has to do with some of these other factors, like who am I, right? So that's what I imagine is one of the biggest factors, is that they're afraid of Arab and Muslim Americans getting organized. And they're afraid of, and right now that would happen through my campaign. Right. So,
and don't say, who are you? You're running for office. It's a huge undertaking. I mean, you're
true.
Giving speeches, you're showing up, and you have a lot to say. You have a platform that we're going to talk about. I want to just remind everyone out there in listener land that you are on KSQD and KSQD and KSQT in Santa Cruz and Prunedale, California. We're talking to Sean Dougherty, who is running for Congress in District 19, which is basically our district. Jimmy Panetta holds the seat right now. He's the incumbent. We're talking about the amount of money that Jimmy Panetta has just received from AIPAC, which is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee,
Political Action Committee.
Right, the AIPAC PAC. And I just want, we have Rose Aguilar on the mornings here on KSQD, and she's been reporting on some of this as well from the publication Lever, who is interestingly founded by, you were telling me, the person who produced or
David
wrote
Sirota, who's a co-writer in Don't Look Up.
And Don't Look Up, and he's also done some other TV shows.
I think he was a staffer for Sanders at one point.
For Bernie Sanders. He was a speechwriter for Bernie Sanders. That's what it was. So it's a publication called Lever, and it's about tracking the money, keeping people accountable. I highly recommend people go there. And this writer who wrote an article in the Lever, let me see if I have his name, Amos Barshad, was talking about another district in Michigan, the 11th district, where a Jewish man, Andy Levin, past president of a synagogue, was running on a ceasefire platform, and AIPAC, I don't know, because AIPAC has several things going on. They have AIPAC, they have AIPAC PAC, and they have this new thing called United Democracy Project, which is it's like a super PAC. So you don't know who's donating, and they don't have to reveal anything, as far as I understand it. And they put $3.9 million into this race. Wow. $3.9 million to support Haley Stevens.
So you're talking about a primary right now, like this cycle?
I believe so, yes. Wow. Just recently, yes. Wow. So it was Andy Levin versus Haley Stevens. They were neck and neck until this money came pouring in. And I hate to break it to you that you might be facing this kind of money. I mean, especially probably.
Well, of course, I knew that would happen regardless going into this race, that he would have millions to throw at me.
Right. And I want to also mention that you had other people at your press conference. You had Nora Hochman, who's a Jewish former labor organizer who is very concerned about what's happening in Israel and Gaza and doesn't want this to be happening in her name. Also, Dr. Ali Mohammed, who's a Palestinian an Arab doctor, who was talking about how many protests are happening. Like, people are shutting down bridges, the Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge. They're showing up for Biden in San Francisco and blocking the streets and getting arrested, and all kinds of stuff is happening almost on a daily basis, and you're not hearing much about it, honestly, in the mainstream media. I just want to acknowledge that there were others there that were talking about the human side of all of this. And do you have any comments? I mean, 30,000 people have been killed as of today, is what I heard, right? In Gaza, including 70% women and children. Of course, journalists, aid workers. Reports right now are that 2.2 million people are in danger of starvation in Gaza currently. And then funding to the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, has been cut from major Western nations. While at the same time, the Wall Street Journal recently reported on U.S. intelligence reports that indicate evidence for UNRWA participation in the October 7th attacks is not strong. Right. Israel has not released that evidence. And here are just a couple of little factoids, and then you can comment. They're not little factoids. They're huge. This is so disturbing. 1,000 children have had one or both legs amputated. And this is a report from UNICEF, often without anesthesia. Right. There's a new acronym coming out of Gaza, WCNSF, which stands for Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. Yeah. So many orphans now who have lost both parents in this war. Is this a central platform of yours?
Of course. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you go on my campaign website, seanforpeace.org, we hit you on the first screen with our demand for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And we use the word genocide. We say stop the genocide because I think it's clear at this point that's what it is. The Israeli government's stated mission of defeating Hamas militarily is, in my opinion, impossible. Just as with the U.S. war on terror, you can't fight terrorism with bombs. If you drop bombs on a civilian population, you radicalize the family members who survive, right?
Yeah.
If some kid sees his mom and dad buried under rubble, what do you think that kid is going to grow up wanting to do? They're going to want to get revenge on the people that did that to their family. So it's faulty logic. It's not going to work. I can't know if they really believe they're going to do that. Are they that delusional? Or is this actually an effort to further encroach on Palestinian land? Is this an effort to simply push the Gazans out of Gaza? And
we're hearing that from the right wing in Israel. We're hearing, they've already
explicit.
had conferences with like design plans for buildings in Gaza,
Yeah.
and we can feel this push to want to push refugees out into Egypt. I understand Egypt is almost already making space, and so it to me that doesn't seem fantastical.
No, I don't think so. But that's why I make a very simple demand for an immediate ceasefire. And I think that the way that we achieve the ceasefire, people will say, well, Biden, Blinken, behind the scenes, they're trying to get this ceasefire. I don't believe that for a second, because if they really wanted a ceasefire, they would just cut off military aid to Israel, which, by the way, we are obligated to do, in my opinion, under international law. The United Nations Genocide Convention says that it is a violation of that convention to provide weapons to an agent that is committing a genocide. So we're required to stop sending weapons. It's that simple.
Wasn't there a State Department official who left due to what he saw as violations of a particular act or some regulations on that aid that have to do with how that aid is used? That happened sort of early on in all
I
of
vaguely
this.
remember that story. I don't remember the details.
Yeah, I wish I had his name. We are talking to Sean Dougherty, who is running for Congress in our district, District 19. Currently, this position of congressperson is held by the incumbent Jimmy Panetta. If you want to ask Sean a question, feel free to call in at 831-900-5773, 831-900-5773, or you can text that number, or you can email us at onair@ksqd.org. I just want to take a moment and say that, at Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, we've been covering the ceasefire resolutions that were offered and put forward at our city council meetings. And we had, I was there, we had 200 to 300 people at those council meetings. To me, it was like a historic number of people. And we covered this on an episode called Is There Hope for Lasting Peace? Posted January 20th with Dr. Abouleish Izzeldin, who is the Palestinian author of I Shall Not Hate. He lost 2 daughters before leaving Gaza and 22 family members since October 7th. And I guess I'm bringing this up because there were so many people who showed up, and then we should move on from this topic and cover some of your other ideas and proposals. But I've just felt like, what is the percentages? Like, it felt like a lot of people showed up, and yet it all felt very dismissed in our community, in the mainstream media. It felt like, oh, this was just a bunch of rabble-rousers and radicals showing up, and then at the end they were so upset, and so then that sort of colored the whole thing as like, these are not, reasonable, rational people. And yet I was there and I saw how upset people were, and a lot of Jewish people, honestly. And are you yourself Jewish? You were saying
I have Jewish family through marriage.
Okay, right. And you're saying that's been difficult.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've got a first cousin living in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And I was very upset when October 7th happened. I was concerned for his safety, but I only had a little bit of conversation with my family, with my Jewish family, about what's happening, because it was clear very quickly that we weren't going to see eye to eye.
Yeah.
But I do want to comment about the mainstream media's coverage of this. Something that really stands out in my memory is when there was a very large protest in D.C. I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the hundreds of thousands of protesters. And if it was covered at all by the big outlets like NBC, CNN, etc., they had these photos like close up of 4 people in frame to make it appear that it wasn't very well attended, to make it look weak. I think there's a lot of that going on.
But what is the reality in terms of polling that you've looked at?
Yeah, well, consistently we see very strong support amongst Democrats specifically, and that's why it's so amazing to see Panetta refusing to call for a ceasefire, because this is an overwhelmingly Democratic district. His constituents want a ceasefire. 4 out of 5 Democrats, according to a recent Data for Progress poll conducted this month, 4 out of 5 Democrats support a ceasefire. 2 out of 3 Americans support a ceasefire. A majority of Republicans support a ceasefire. Like, this is not a fringe position to be calling for a ceasefire. It is the mainstream position to be calling for a ceasefire.
Yeah. And I know you're not a one-note samba, and I want to talk a little bit about, a few things. Money in general, campaign finance. Tell me how much you have heard that the incumbent has raised, your other Republican opponent, and yourself.
So I know the Panetta campaign has something like $3 million cash on hand. I don't know how much he raised this primary. I don't want to say a number that's totally wrong, so I'm not going to say. I know that the Republican has, as of the last I heard a couple weeks ago, $650, and my campaign has raised about $11,500. So not even close. I really would love to know what he needs that money for. Nobody can come even close to Panetta in fundraising.
Yeah.
So what? And actually, my wife and I were looking through some of the FEC filings to see what he was spending his money on. In this primary so far, he spent most of his money on fundraising consultants.
Interesting. Well, maybe he's getting a big strategy together, and unfortunately he's not here to talk about it. But I am talking to Sean Dougherty, who is running for Congress in California, District 19. This kind of goes to money in general, money in defense spending, and what your priorities are around defense and social programs. I do want to mention, I think this is important to comment on, because I get concerned, is that Jimmy Panetta was one of 3 Democratic members of the Republican-controlled House Budget Committee on Thursday that advanced legislation to establish a fiscal commission that critics say is a Trojan horse for Social Security and Medicare cuts. The Social Security Works President Nancy Altman is saying this in an article from Common Dreams, which is entitled "Shame, 3 Democrats Joined GOP to Advance Backdoor Attack on Social Security." So this would somehow what do you understand about this setting up a commission, I suppose, of fiscal responsibility that could then deal with Social Security? Right.
So I think people who are advocates for a strong Social Security understand this as a way to ultimately cut Social Security. You'll hear arguments from the people who want to cut Social Security that it's not feasible in the long term, it's insolvent or whatever they say. So in order to be fiscally responsible, we have to, say, cut the rate at which it grows. So based on that, Jimmy Panetta's argument that we need to have reforms so that Social Security is strong and survives. To me, he sounds just like these right-wingers. When I hear him say that, I hear, we're going to cut Social Security.
Yeah.
Or cut the rate at which it grows so it doesn't keep up with inflation.
Right. The Social Security Works people are very upset. They actually went in with a petition, sort of like yelling at this particular committee to not do this, to save Social Security. The last thing we need are more people on the streets and more elderly people living on our streets, as far as I'm concerned. So because we're running out of time already and we haven't been able to cover half of your platform, what are the most important things you want to say about your platform? I'm just going to sort of give you the floor here.
Well, the 2 big things are, I want to get money out of politics. I'd like to see publicly financed campaigns. And I want to cut money from defense spending and put it into social programs. I don't know. Do you want me to get into either of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you think is important. We have 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So for publicly financed campaigns, I think that the special interest money that representatives are taking are controlling how they're voting. And I think that a representative who is taking money, say, from fossil fuel companies isn't going to do the right thing when it comes to stopping all new oil and gas projects. If they're taking money from Blue Cross Blue Shield, I don't think that they're going to vote to give us Medicare for all, single payer, and so on. So we need to get that out of the system. And, another thing is that from what I've heard, representatives spend most of their time dialing for dollars. They're not spending time thinking about and working on legislation. They're calling up donors trying to get money for the next election cycle. So I think there would be a lot of benefits to having a public finance system for the elections.
Absolutely.
And so as to my platform, what I would like to do is dramatically cut the defense budget. We could cut our defense budget by 50%, and we would still have the biggest defense budget in the world by a lot. We would still be 50% bigger than the next biggest one. And that money that we cut could give us paid family and medical leave, medical debt forgiveness, housing for all, debt-free college. And by debt-free, I mean it would cover both tuition and room and board at four-year universities.
Yeah.
And then after all that, we would still have about 25% of that defense budget remaining.
Wow.
After those programs I just listed.
Yeah.
And so I would say let's put that into a single-payer healthcare system.
Yeah. And that would be like taking money away from, I guess, Raytheon and all these different companies, which we actually saw. It was like October 8th. All of a sudden, these stocks shot up.
Exactly.
It was crazy. I saw the graphs.
That's right. And that's why, you heard in that clip from my press conference yesterday, that's how I had been understanding Panetta's position on Gaza. I thought he's not calling for a ceasefire because his big donors are making profits off of Gaza. But now, and I think there is truth to that. I think that is part of what's going on. But I think the AIPAC money is clearly significant.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, his father was a CIA director and defense secretary. I mean, is he talking to his dad? And I'm not assuming that there's anything nefarious happening. We have a phone call. Well, we have like 3 minutes. Possibly we could take one question. We'll see what this caller has to say. We are talking to Sean Dougherty, running for Congress in California, District 19. I wanted to talk to you about... Well, people are confused about voting for you as if it's going to hurt Jimmy's chances because he's a Democrat, and then you're going to somehow bolster the Republican.
Right. So I think most people in this district are Democrats, and bad though Panetta may be, they'd much rather see him in office than a MAGA Republican, right? I don't have to explain that. And the reason why I think they believe that is because in presidential politics and presidential races, when you're in the general election, you can have Green versus Republican versus Democrat. And, someone who votes Green, and that takes away from the Democrat, right? That's the spoiler effect.
In a general.
Right, in the general.
Right.
But with the congressional primary here in California, its top two go on to the next, into the general. So in this race, we've got Democrat, Republican, Green. So every vote for the Green makes it more likely that the Republican gets knocked out because the Democrat, the incumbent, Panetta, is definitely going to get number one. If I can beat out the Republican, then this November election is between a Democrat and a Green.
Okay, gotcha. We've got a caller with a question. Hello, caller, are you on? You've got 30 seconds to ask your question.
Not a question, just a comment. How refreshing it is to hear from a candidate I'd actually like to vote for.
Thank you.
I'm a social studies teacher, and I talk to my students when I've taught government in the past that it's really frustrating that not very often people get to vote for who they're really excited about. So often it's about voting for who you don't want to win, right? And, voting so that the other guy doesn't win or the other person doesn't win. And, your policies sound amazing, and, you got my vote, my man.
Thank you so much.
What's your name? What's your name, sir?
My name's Sandino.
Sandino. Okay, we're going to have to take you off the air because we have to wrap it up. But thank you so much for your call, Sandino.
No worries. Keep it up, Sean.
Thank you.
And because we're getting down to the wire, I wanted to ask you about climate change. I wanted to ask you about why you're running green. We were going to talk about Ukraine, which you and I have differences on, but people can probably go to your website. Let's give people your website so they can find out more about Sean Dougherty running for California, District 19 for Congress.
SeanForPeace.org. That's spelled SeanForPeace.org. peace.org.
Thank you so much for coming on to KSQD. Sean, we appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me.